What is the loss of a loved one worth? What if they died in the Twin Towers on 9/11? What if you lost your livelihood after the BP oil spill? How it would quantify this in a dollar amount, that is one of the challenges our next guest has had to wrestle with. He's the man the New York Times calls a kind of modern-day Solomon, the person who in the aftermath of those and other moments of crisis in this country is tasked to answer the very questions and more that I posed. Mr. Feinberg, he calls himself a lawyer and a mediator in one, and he gained notoriety by working pro bono on the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. A delicate task required both balance and sensitivity, and in that effort, he personally conducted hundreds of hearings, which allowed survivors the chance to argue their claims. That episode in his life is one of many recounted in a single chapter of his book, Who Gets What? Fair Compensation After Tragedy and Financial Upheaval. The rest, it profiles his experiences, the ones picked up the financial pieces and distributes them after moments of crisis. He's the man who's decided after so many moments of hardship, things like Virginia Tech, Agent Orange after Vietnam, the BP oil spill, and he tries to figure out what your loss is worth. We're very pleased to have Kenneth Feinberg join us now. Kenneth, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's start where this started, I guess. One of your mentors, and you talk about in the book here, Jack Weinstein, a New York federal judge, he was tasked to figure out basically the right compensation allotment for victims of Agent Orange, and he brought you on board with him to do this, and it kind of set you on the course that you find yourself in to this day. Talk about what that was like in the 80s.
That was a real challenge because the Vietnam veterans were convinced that their various maladies and injuries were caused by exposure to the Agent Orange herbicide while serving in Vietnam. But in the courtroom, they were going to have a very difficult challenge in demonstrating cause and effect. And even though the litigation settled for about $250 million, Judge Weinstein had the real dilemma and challenge of trying to figure out who gets what.
Did you have any idea when you were doing this that this was a specialty, some would say a thankless one, that in effect you were becoming the person to go to at moments of national tragedy, and that people were going to look to you to make impossible decisions that weren't going to make everybody happy, but somebody had to make them?
No, I never thought at the time of Agent Orange that this would be a professional career changer. I was brought in that one case to help resolve the litigation and design and administer the compensation program, but I didn't realize at the time that it would be a precedent for me to do something similar 10, 25 years thereafter.
You know, for thousands of families in our region, Kenneth, I'm sure some even watching now, you became the face in the aftermath of 9/11 that they had to go to. And you yourself in the book, it's curious to me, don't think that, A, the system was perfect from a precedent standpoint, let alone, from maybe an equity standpoint, to try and figure out different values of different human lives. But you were forced to do that. Could you explain to the viewers the constraints you were given when you began these hearings to try and figure out what valuations, in effect, you were going to put on the loss of loved ones for these families?
11 days after 9/11, Congress passed a law. And the law simply said, any victim or family of a victim of 9/11 attacks that wanted to voluntarily opt out of the litigation system, don't go to court, instead come into a very generous, publicly funded compensation alternative. You don't have to, but if you want to voluntarily come into the program and waive your right to litigate against the airlines, the World Trade Center, Massport, the Port Authority, Boeing, come on in. Well, the challenge in 9/11 was, of course, the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund, though that voluntary choice guaranteed that every single claimant would get a different amount of money. The stockbroker, the banker, his family would have to get more than the waiter, the busboy, the soldier, the fireman, the policeman. And therefore, the real challenge that I confronted was calculating who gets what and calculating it in a way that under the statute guaranteed that everybody would get a different amount of money, and those were real challenges.
And in going through the book, it's clear that your life's good deeds. If you worked at a soup kitchen, 5 afternoons a week here, that wasn't going to put more money in your pocket than if you were a SOB who was a big rainmaker, figure in the industry here. At the end of the day, it's the balance sheet of your life that kind of dictated, the guidelines you had to follow, right?
That's correct. Judges, juries, courtrooms, they do that every day. In every court, in every city, village, hamlet in this country. You cannot calculate and put a dollar sign next to the moral integrity of a victim. All you can do with money is compensate for what that individual would have earned over a lifetime, but for terrible, unanticipated tragedy. And that's what we did.
I'm curious. I know that you said that your plan was you were going to start a mega law firm before the 9/11 assignment came your way, but it profoundly changed you. And I'm curious, were there any particular stories as the families were filling in the gaps of their loved ones when explaining or coming to you to try and figure out the value of their loved one's life that stayed with you in particular?
Hundreds. I conducted personally about 900 hearings. So the stories I heard from individual family members were harrowing, were chilling. The very first hearing I conducted, a 24-year-old woman came to see me. And she said, "Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband. He was a fireman at the World Trade Center, and he died on 9/11. I have 2 little children. You're going to award me something like $1 million tax-free, but I want it delivered to me in 30 days. I said to her, "Well, it may take a little bit longer for us to process the paperwork and get you the money." And she said, "I don't have a little bit longer. I have terminal cancer. I was going to survive my husband and take care of the children. Now they're going to be orphans. My husband's gone. I only have 10 weeks to live. I need that money, and I need it fast to set up a trust for my 2 children." Well, we accelerated the payment, and 8 weeks later, she died. And we heard story after story like that during my administration of the 9/11 fund.
You write in the book that it changed your life in terms of not just your career path, but also how you live your life. You're more fatalistic, you say, right?
That's right. I don't think I'll plan anything more than 2 weeks ahead.
You've had obviously a lot of other assignments from obviously figuring out you were the pay czar after obviously the collapse and figuring out for executives that were bailed out the packages. After the BP mess down there, you called yourself a human piñata when you went down to the Gulf for a lot of reasons, one of which was you got paid for your services down there when you did the job. Did you expect as much of the vitriol? I know you're not unused to getting beyond the other end, the receiving end of criticism when you go through this, but were you expecting the level of it that you got?
Well, I should have expected it. I was a little bit surprised, but the fact is, in all of these compensation programs, you're dealing with a very emotional population of victims who are victims through no fault of their own. They've been thrown a curveball, and they're trying to confront financial uncertainty caused by a tragedy that is not of their making. So you better expect a fair amount of emotional criticism, anger, frustration, cynicism when it comes to a compensation program.
You know, there was, switching gears for a second, there was a chapter in there where you talk about when you're coming up, you worked in the late Senator Kennedy's office, and among the other young guys in the office, you had David Boyce, who everyone remembers from Bush v. Gore, as well as now Supreme Court Justice Breyer. Did anyone ever win an argument over those lunches between the three of you?
Oh, we usually exchanged views and had a lot of respect for what we thought of each other's views. But all of us realized that at the end of the day, the best advocate for any position, the one with the most convincing arguments, was Senator Kennedy himself. Senator Kennedy combined rare intellectual gifts, photographic memory, compassionate human being, empathetic human being. He usually carried the day when it came to any argument about public policy.
A very political answer there. Let me ask you, finally, one of the things I walked away was you yourself don't believe that the strategies that even you've employed here are perfect systems, and they open up questions that are very difficult to answer as to, for example, why the Oklahoma City bombing victims, they didn't share in a compensation fund similar to the 9/11 victims. And you even said you would have preferred an equal distribution for all victims. What do you think, if you had to redesign it, is there a better way to do it than the way that we've done it? And how do we decide what next national tragedy merits this compensation? I understood exactly the dilemmas you talk about in the book, but I just don't know what the answers are. Do you have any answer to it?
Well, those are two very difficult questions you pose, fundamental questions. First, these programs should be very, very rare. They raise their success, raise serious public policy problems that you point out. Why 9/11 and BP, but no program for Katrina or for Oklahoma City? Why do some people get the benefit of very generous compensation, while others, the victims of Oklahoma City or Katrina, are shut out? And I think that is why I argue in the book that the program should be exceedingly rare and must be viewed solely from the perspective of the American people, not the victims. If the American people decide through their elected representatives there ought to be a special program just for these victims, that's democracy in action, and that's the only way to justify these programs. Second question, as I mentioned in the book, I believe that we would be well advised to give every eligible claimant the same amount of money. What I learned in 9/11, when you start giving certain victims more money than others, you promote the very emotional divisiveness you're trying to avoid in setting up these programs. So I believe it would be better that set up these programs very rare. Don't do it as a precedent. Don't start proliferating these programs. And when you do set up a program, give every eligible claimant the same amount of money so that you're not counting other people's money, which just fans disagreement and divisiveness.
Last thing, Kenneth, obviously you must have already thought about this, but there will be another natural disaster or man-made tragedy on American soil. Hopefully not in your lifetime, but if it does happen again and you're asked to play Solomon, will you do it, or have you had enough?
Of course I'd do it. What I do is not rocket science. There are millions of Americans that could do exactly what I do. If I'm asked to do it again, by a president, by an attorney general, by the Congress, by a judge, I would answer the same way that millions of Americans would answer. If you're asked to perform a service in the public interest, you do it.
Again, the book, What is Life Worth? Who Gets What? Fair Compensation After Tragedy and Financial Upheaval. Kenneth Feinberg, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.